This Week in Law is up next. We've got Cash Hill, Lisa Borodkin, and Evan Brown joining me today. We're going to talk about the Facebook IPO and its privacy policy changes, Twitter's too, privacy correctness, VoIP on a plane, and lots more next on TWiL.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
Bandwidth for This Week in Law is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is TWiL, This Week in Law with Denise Howell, episode 162, recorded May 18, 2012. Girls Around Evan. This episode of This Week in Law is brought to you by Squarespace.com, the fast and easy way to create a high-quality website or blog. For a free trial and 10% off your first purchase on new accounts, go to squarespace.com, use the offer code TWiL5, and they now offer free domain registration with annual plan subscriptions. And by Sharefile. Enhance your workflow, send files of almost any size easily and securely with Sharefile by Citrix. Try Sharefile today. I have a great offer to get you started, a 30-day free trial plus double storage. To get this offer, visit sharefile.com, click the radio microphone, and enter the promo code TWiL. Hi, folks. It's Denise Howell, and you've tuned in for This Week in Law. We've got a lot to talk about this morning. Facebook has just come out with its IPO. We're going to talk about them, its stock, and its various privacy considerations. But first, I want to welcome our excellent panel. We've got Cash Hill here from Forbes. Hello, Cash.
Hi, Denise. How are you?
Doing well. Great to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Also joining us is Lisa Borodkin. Hello, Lisa.
Hello, Denise.
Great to have you back.
Same here.
And Evan Brown. Hi, Evan.
Hey, Denise. Hi, Cash. Hi, Lisa. How's everybody doing?
Doing great. Doing great. I hear from those who are out there trying to buy Facebook stock. Jeff Clavier actually managed to get some at $38 a share this morning. So he said on Google Plus. I wonder how many are similarly situated. It looks like right now it's trading at 40.63 according to CNN Money's live feed. So let's talk about the IPO of the year, I guess, so far, and the company behind it. I saw Mark Zuckerberg just turned 28 this week, just in time for the company to launch its IPO. And also, Evan, before the show, you let us know that Marty Schwimmer's blog he just posted today turned 10 today. So I guess that means that Zuck was 18 when you and I and Marty and probably most of us here on the show today started writing and analyzing legal things in any kind of detail relating to privacy and net law. So in 10 years, he's done quite a bit, I'd have to say. Cash, you looked earlier this week at the latest and greatest update to the data use policy at Facebook. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so in preparation for, I guess, going public, Facebook was just kind of getting its papers in order. So it updated its data use policy to make it clear what it can and can't do with your data. It wasn't actually changing anything in terms of use of data. It was saying, we have the timeline now, your timeline photo is public, your gender is public. But the most interesting thing to me was that they made clear that Facebook has the right to use the information on Facebook in ads anywhere, even off Facebook. So this really paves the way for Facebook to have a ad network with ads that can follow you around the web, which will eventually be, I think, quite profitable for them.
So give us a concrete example of how that might work. They've given themselves this permission. So what do you expect to see exactly happen?
Well, one thing people have pointed out about Facebook is that the ads on the actual social networking site aren't that effective because we're usually on Facebook because we want to play and look at our friends' status updates and their photos, and we're not really thinking about what we want to buy. And this is part of the reason why I think General Motors announced this week that they're pulling the $10 million that they've been spending on Facebook advertising. So the way that it would be different is that Facebook could have an ad network that is, it would be like the ads that pop up when you're doing a Google search. They could have an ad network where American Apparel could show Facebook ads. So they could show you, advertisements for particular clothing based on what you said you like on Facebook. So you could see Facebook ads anywhere around the web, kind of the way that you see now when you go to certain news websites that your friends have liked a particular article.
Mm-hmm. So is this a bad thing, do you think?
And there could be some privacy implications in having more tracking, having ads that are contextualized based on Facebook information that you see elsewhere. I don't think there'll be any additional leakage of information, but again, we'll probably run into that scenario where people feel uncomfortable and have that sense that Facebook is tracking them everywhere. So I'm sure it will upset some Facebook users because what privacy issue doesn't?
Right, exactly. So my dad is visiting for the weekend and has been asking me during the run-up to the IPO, how exactly is this company monetizing, and making me try and explain that. Evan, it sounds to me like having an ad network where Facebook ads could show up anywhere is a big answer to that question. Do you agree?
I suppose so. Anytime that there's going to be a larger area in which these ads are displayed, there is a greater chance that they'll actually be seen. A couple of points along these lines that I'm thinking about. One, Cash pointed out that when you're on Facebook, you're really there not so much to be marketed to, but to interact with your friends and your connections there and to play. The other place I see, or other way in which I see this being potentially relevant, is Facebook's exploitation of the mobile market. It seems like there are new opportunities there for advertising that are different in kind than what we're used to even now with contextual advertising in places off the web. I just saw something where Amazon, for example, is seriously tossing around the idea of selling advertising space on the home screen of the Kindle Fire when you turn that up. So, taking that principle over into what Facebook's doing with your mobile device, you're essentially always, logged into Facebook. It's not like on the machine where you have to log in and keep the browser session open and all that stuff. It's much more likely that the other things you'll be doing in the mobile environment is when there is an open session with Facebook. So that seems like a pretty there's some good potential there for Facebook to monetize in a platform outside of the actual environment in the mobile space in that way.
I forget exactly where I saw it, but in some of the coverage around the IPO, I saw some other, I'm not sure if it was just bald speculation or if it was following up on something the company has actually said, that other ways in which we will begin to see changes and more revenue generated at Facebook is things like if you wanted to guarantee that something you posted on your timeline was seen by everybody that's following you. Right now, it's sort of catch can, what goes out and what does not. I suppose if somebody visits your page, they're going to see it, but this would be something appearing in the river of information that people take in when they go to the homepage of Facebook. So there would be, a way to charge for that kind of enhanced presence, I guess you could call it. And also, I guess, the reverse, that if there are things that you do not want to see, that you want to turn off, that you could begin paying for that kind of service as well. But what do you think about all this, Lisa?
Well, it's definitely a profound change in the nature of Facebook's business. I think your father is right. It's a very interesting question. How will Facebook live up to its obligations to its shareholders to create value over a sustained period? The current valuation is double that of Ford Motors. And with Ford Motors, it's very clear what the value-producing proposition is. You sell cars. But a couple of years ago, or maybe just a year ago, Facebook started advertising itself as saying, Facebook, it's free and always will be. So that means it never will have a product to sell other than the type of advertising revenue that you and Cash have already been talking about. So if you look back at the history of Facebook, what started as a world-changing, social, casual, sort of fun way to connect with people, now, due to the U.S. securities laws, is under tremendous pressure and will be for the rest of its existence to constantly produce value. And of course, now it's, I guess there was a line in the Accidental Billionaires that said, ads aren't cool. You know what's cool? $1 billion. So now they're going to have to make ads cool to justify the 90-some billion dollar valuation that they have.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest challenge of any social platform these days is making ads cool. And no one's really managed to do that. Facebook, I think, has the goal of pulling it off and maybe the ability, given all the data they have. But the devil's always in the details with that one. We'll just have to see whether they wind up annoying us and further aggravating the people who think they're a privacy nightmare to begin with, or whether they manage to get it right. Cash, what's your best guess on that?
Well, one thing I wonder about with ads, and I mean, increasingly we're dependent on ads, internet businesses, to make money. I'm not sure what I'm getting there. I use Ad Blocker. It's a Mozilla add-on that allows me never to see ads. And this is something that's happening in the TV industry right now, where there's a new DVR where you can just automatically skip all of the commercials. And so the TV industry is understandably freaking out because they make their money off of commercials. And there's this new product that lets people not watch the commercials they don't want to watch.
Right.
So I think that we'll see that as more people discover ad blockers. I'm really wondering how internet businesses are going to cope, because then people won't just ignore ads. They just simply won't see them at all.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's what I was thinking about when you were talking about, when Denise, you were talking about, making ads cool. I was thinking about this similar issue that's faced by advertisers on television. And my understanding is that advertisers have responded by bringing the line closer together, or kind of enmeshing the ideas of the advertisement and the content itself through things. I mean, the salient example is through product placement. And to make ads cool on the internet, it seems like there's going to have to be some kind of meshing together of the advertisement and the actual content that users go to consume on social media platforms, and thinking of it less as ads standing alone to the side. And the closest thing I can imagine that we've really seen along these lines so far is, the sponsored story on Facebook, where the idea of the endorsement of the product or saying that it's a good thing is tied with the identity of the other node in the network to whom the user of the social media platform is connected. So it seems natural and almost unavoidable that we would need to think of online advertising in a new way in the future, much more integrated to the content, which is what is bringing people to these places online in the first place.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, Cash, that you raised the issue of this new DVR that's coming out from Dish Network. It's called the Hopper, presumably because it allows you to hop right over ads. And, it's shades of, if folks are old enough and their memories are intact enough to recall, back in 2001, there was the Replay TV, which similarly promised that it was a DVR that was going to let you skip ads and also share some things that you had recorded with other people on the network. Of course, the television networks didn't like that at all and sued them basically into being hamstrung and ultimate bankruptcy. The lawsuit was stayed, and when Sonic Blue, the parent company, ultimately came out with the next replay device, it had dropped both those controversial features. So we never really got a ruling on, the asserted claims in the case, which included copyright infringement, which I think is a real interesting posture to take when you're talking about ad skipping. I could see it on the sharing front, but I would love to see a television network try and take the position that, our broadcast programming, including ads, consists of some kind of copyrighted work that you cannot then mess with or allow users to mess with. So, I don't know if they would have gone down that road or not, but we see it coming up again, and I wonder if once again we're going to see the networks rise up and try and squash the hopper. And as you say, Cash, ad blockers essentially do the same thing on the web, and they've been flying under the radar for a while. But I wonder how long that will last. What do you think, Evan?
Well, I'm just sitting here pondering the copyright question on that. I mean, there was a similar issue, not on all fours with this, but the question of whether or not the little pop-up ad. You remember we're really getting nostalgic on some of the topics we're talking about, going way back to 01. Like When You was that little thing that I know it was bundled with Kazaa and other software that you would download, and it would have the little pop-up in the lower right-hand corner of the window come up. It was different than an ordinary pop-up ad. And in some of the litigation over that, there was the claim that putting that up and changing the way that the web page you were looking at was displayed was an infringement, or because it was messing with it wasn't an infringement. I guess it was claimed infringement because it changed the way that the page looked. And I don't think that claim was a winner. That got tossed out in one way or the other. But I am familiar with this controversy of ad blockers changing the way that the page looks, and I know that there have been grumblings for a number of years of whether that is an infringement. I suppose that Cash is certainly among a very relatively small number of internet users who actually employ those tools. With the Firefox add-on, I would venture to guess that that's way less than 1% of all users. I have that's a statistic I'm totally making up on the spot. It could be that like 90% of everybody's using that.
It's somewhere between 1 and 90, I think.
There we go. You see, that's the way we can always approach these things. Yeah. So, I mean, if I assume that if it were more of a critical mass, then we would actually see more of a call from the advertisers to be concerned about this. So, the technology is there. I just have a feeling it's not been inflammatory enough to give rise to a real dispute yet.
And I think they don't want to complain about it because they don't want to give other users ideas.
That's a good point.
That's not to bring more publicity to the fact that it exists.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, Facebook has obviously had privacy issues from the get-go. And one thing that it has done recently that you've written about, Cash, is make it easy for folks and also sort of fashionable, for lack of a better word, socially upstanding and correct to disclose as part of its automated scripts when you're doing a status update if you have become or are already an organ donor. And so you were watching to see whether Mark Zuckerberg had actually disclosed his status. I guess he ultimately did. But you made a real excellent point, Cash, that it's more of a norm that's being set here, that this has been a thing that has been private by default because there's no real way or reason, unless you're in a car accident and somebody needs access to your organs before they're no longer useful, to proclaim that, yes, indeed, I'm a donor and you should make use. And now it's just something, to go along with, it's a sunny day here in Southern California. And by the way, I'm an organ donor. What do you think about that kind of a shift in our attitude towards private information?
Yeah, I think this goes back to Lawrence Lessig and this idea that code is law. And Facebook is increasingly the platform where we interact and where we kind of define ourselves, that we fill out our profile, we say what we like, we say who we are. And so they've now introduced this new box to check you are an organ donor or you are not an organ donor. And I just think it's this really interesting kind of use of transparency and social pressure to encourage people to do this thing, which is a good thing to do. It would be, helpful to the health system in general to have more organs available. But it is a strange thing to have as part of your Facebook profile, that you're, willing to give up a kidney or part of your liver or bone marrow, or, more likely you're willing to give up organs after or when you're close to death. So it's a strange new kind of intrusion into the body, which I think is maybe a first for Facebook. Though I know in Japan people do include their blood type on social networking pages.
That's great. And I suppose if you were a liver donor, you would really want to be judicious about the drinking photos you post. So it's like, I don't want his liver.
Yes, maybe that's how Facebook's planning to monetize. There could be this sort of stepped-up basis of what your organs are actually worth based on your health and other activities.
Well, they've got to monetize it somehow, so they'll get that data to the healthcare industry, I suppose.
Lisa, there's a pretty interesting article by Lauren Weinstein that I threw in our discussion points for today. Wondering if we are going with our privacy attitudes the way that we have gone over the last several decades with our political attitudes toward positions that, traditionally may not have been the way people felt, but are the way that things are stated now because they are politically correct. And she's wondering if we're also getting so sensitive about privacy information that we are starting to have privacy correctness as sort of an artificial societal overlay to discourse. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't really agree with it. I think it's good to talk about it. And I guess I see where she is coming from. Lauren is a she, I think.
It's a he.
Oh, it's a he. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, Lauren. What surprised me about that article was the assumption that there is some identifiable norm of privacy correctness. Just to recap, the thesis is that just as we have this concept of political correctness, which is generally a derogatory term to allude to a certain narrow-mindedness in a universe of political attitudes that are acceptable to hold, that we become sort of reactionary in terms of our attitudes towards privacy. Personally, that does not comport with my experience. I would say still the majority of people that I talk with and interact with who aren't privacy advocates or similar, they really don't see it as such a huge issue. So I kind of wished that the article could get a little more specific about what they think the correct, quote, attitudes are. My big issue, the thing that alarmed me was changing the rules about sharing and use and policies sort of midstream. Once someone's relied on a certain notion of how Facebook or a social network will operate, I think it's reasonable to expect them to live up to that deal and not kind of experiment along the way and decide for themselves that norms have shifted so that people don't really care as much about their original intentions in sharing data. I'm against any concept of, sort of narrowing what's an acceptable point of view. I think it's very important to be respectful and hear perspectives from all sides.
I think the organ donor function or feature on Facebook is a good backdrop for a privacy correctness discussion, because it's the kind of thing, yes, they've put it in so it's easy to disclose what previously no one would have thought to disclose in that kind of context, but you don't have to do it. Nobody's, extracting that information from you. And as Cash pointed out, societally, it's a good thing to have more organs available, and maybe peer pressure along that line is not such a terrible notion. What do you think about privacy correctness, Kashmir?
I think this is interesting. I see a lot of there are a lot of times when I think privacy advocates assert more of a privacy angst than normal people feel. I haven't seen this as much. The organ donor thing didn't seem to upset people that much because it is absolutely voluntary as to whether you put that information in or not. I really saw this around the iPhone app Girls Around Me, which was this app that took information from Foursquare where people were checked in. And it basically aggregated data mostly about women and showed a map showing you where people were checked in around you, which is why it was called Girls Around Me. And so you could see where the ladies were at. And if they had connected their Foursquare account to the Facebook account, then you could get profile information about them. So when people wrote about this, they wrote about the app as very creepy and suggested it would be used by stalkers and rapists. And so I guess that's what I started to think about that I might compare to privacy correctness, where it's kind of a privacy overreaction, whereas I could see good uses of this kind of technology. In the particular context in which it was presented, it was a little creepy because they had kind of James Bond's naked silhouettes of women. So it suggested that the women around you were sexually available, which
we're
is
Bond
not
girls.
Necessarily. Yeah, exactly. Which is not exactly what all female Foursquare users are trying to project in their use of the application.
Yeah, that is that is another great example. I mean, you could definitely see, part of the reason that people are using Foursquare and that feature, that you could tick or untick of letting folks know around you where you've checked in, even if you're not connected with them otherwise, is, it's just one step away from an app like that, right? That definitely that's the goal, that you want to know, you want to maybe meet someone new, or, potentially the dark side of that, you want to maybe stalk someone new. So
it's a natural evolution of the technology. And I think to suggest that isn't allowed is a kind of privacy protectionism, where it's privacy for people's own good, whether they want it or not. And I find that kind of paternalism troubling.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, people get to make their own choices as long as, I'd like those choices to be as informed as possible. What do you think about that one, Evan?
Well, I see this discussion about the Girls Around Me and the app, by the way, not the literal girls around me, but that this use of information that is out there and is publicly available as a good example of what Lauren Weinstein in his blog post was talking about as a legitimate thing to really be talking about in terms of privacy. There are a couple of points that he makes where it's actually something useful to be talking about, and that is the first point is to resign to the fact that public information is public information, and that there really is no good sense in talking about that in terms of, or in the context of, privacy alarmism, when there really is no privacy implicated there because the information is public. Taking that out a little bit to a broader scope and thinking of privacy correctness, I see some usefulness in the critique, not so much in the way that we've approached it in the conversation so far, but more in terms of the misuse or the too general kind of platitude-laden speech that people use to talk about privacy in ways that really aren't helpful and don't do much to advance the cause of privacy. And here's an example of what I'm talking about. And I just wrote a blog post about this yesterday at internetcases.com. I commend everybody to go take a look and maybe comment on this. And it's a critique that I made of the use of the word transparency when we're talking about user privacy. It's so easy to just toss out that word transparency as if it's going to, as if the platform, like Facebook is clearly what we're talking about here. If Facebook would only let us know how it uses our information and what it's going to do with it, then all our concerns are somehow alleviated. That that use of the word transparency seems to be something along the lines of what Lauren Weinstein is calling privacy correctness here, and in as much of the same way that just tossing around the words diversity or inclusion or coexistence and collaboration could be, politically correct. In the abstract, those have no real helpful meaning. The way that you can really make a difference and give them traction is to put those into play in the real concrete world. Going back to privacy, the discussion of privacy, transparency, that concept really has no benefit in the discussion. And in fact, the platforms are going to be resistant to that because they're given a competitive advantage because of the proprietary nature in which the information that they gather is used, and law of trade secrets would protect that. So what my conclusion is, we need to dump the catchwords like transparency because they're so freighted with fluffiness that they don't help the discussion. What we really need to focus is our ultimate objective, like trust. And that's that's where we need to get to, and doing away, toning down what we're calling privacy correctness here will help us really focus on the more the issues that really need to be addressed when we're talking about privacy in general.
Right. Excellent point. And I think, if you're going to hang a label like transparency on something and laud a company for being transparent, you'd better mean that people are actually able to understand that information that they're being given, too, that it's not just being fed to them in a 500-page legal document that no one reads and that they have to click yes on to use the service.
Well,
so
at
go
least one comment. I mean, I can think of one very concrete example that would make Evan's point. I mean, one very concrete instance in which sort of the operation of, quote, transparency would be used is something as simple as the sort of step-by-step process by which one opts into these types of apps. So I've never used the Girls Around Me app. I don't know exactly how it works. It sounded like Cash said that the user has to opt in to be included among the girls around. But there was a very good article that was kind of an expose of Facebook apps. The Facebook apps are very popular. People develop them. They create some sort of a function that layers onto the Facebook API, and it exists solely within Facebook. Well, this article reviewed the top 10 or 15 Facebook apps and found that you had to actually accept the terms and opt in before you could even read or get to the privacy policy. It's probably a trivial mistake, but it's so common that even though we all know, most people don't really peruse terms of service that thoroughly. I mean, sometimes just the order in which something is presented to you, you don't know what it is that the app wants permission to do, but you have to say, yes, I'm going to give you permission to post to my wall, blah, 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 before you even know what the app does. And that would be a very concrete instance in which many, many developers could improve, I think.
Just to clarify, I think that the opt-in for something like a Girls Around Me would happen at the level of Foursquare. Now, I haven't used Foursquare in a few months, so you guys set me straight if I'm wrong. But as I recall, when I initially set up my account in Foursquare, you had the option to let people know who you did not know and were not otherwise connected with in your vicinity when you had checked into a particular place. Or you had the option to only let your network know that thing. Now, I could be wrong. They may. That's
correct, Denise.
Is that right? Okay, good.
Yeah, exactly right.
But what you may not be expecting then is, okay, so I'm letting people see on Foursquare where I am, is that then I'm assuming via an API, a third-party app is going to take that information and set it up in a slightly different context where someone is trolling for women and is just filtering out the women in the vicinity. So, I mean, there's a bit maybe of a privacy disconnect there, but it gets back to what Evan was saying and what Lauren Weinstein was saying. When something is public, it's public, and you have to be able to live with the consequences of that.
one thing I want to go back to what Lisa was talking about in terms of people not reading terms of service and not reading privacy policies. I mean, many studies have shown, no one reads privacy policies. And most people, when they go to a site or an app, they see privacy policy and they think that means that their privacy is protected, that it is almost like, an FDA type, this is being sold in a grocery store, so it's safe. And this is just kind of a misinterpretation of what privacy policy means. And I think it's interesting. Facebook has actually changed the name of their privacy policy. It's now the data use policy, which I think is more appropriate because most privacy policies are describing the way your data is going to be exploited, not protected.
Right.
Yep. All right. Well, we are here with Kashmir Hill and Lisa Borodkin and Evan Brown. We have lots more to talk about, including checking in on what's going on with Oracle versus Google, net neutrality, what devices you can use on an airplane and when. But before we get to that, I want to thank our first sponsor of this episode of This Week in Law, which is Squarespace. I use Squarespace and love it. I know lots of you do too. But if you're not yet a user, you want to take advantage of this great service and the offer that we have for you. If you haven't used it yet, it has an easy-to-use user interface for creating and managing any website or blog. They've recently started giving out free domains to all annual plan customers so that you never have to pay for a domain or worry about hosting it. How great is that? That, it's just part of your whole web site process. Your domain is built right in. It's all conveniently integrated when you sign up and requires zero configuration by making domain selection and mapping completely seamless. And even if you decide to cancel the service, the domain is yours to keep. Squarespace has also simplified its subscription plans and provided reduced pricing now. They offer standard plans starting as low as $8 a month. That's a really amazing deal. Optimized for both beginners and CSS experts, featuring a developer-friendly CSS editor that allows you to pop out the entire window in full screen. You can colorize code, undo, find, and replace. They have hundreds of beautiful design templates to choose from, and you can customize any of them to fit your exact needs. There are iPhone, iPad, and Android apps for updating your blog on the go. It's got Google's complete web font library with over 300 fonts now fully integrated, online resources, and a special support team to give you personal help 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. As someone who's more on the novice side than the CSS expert side, I can tell you that support team has been invaluable and are very responsive and follow up until your problem is solved. They even offer free live webinar classes to help you get the most out of your Squarespace site or blog. Their all-inclusive service includes several modules to build your site. There's a blog module, a form builder module, Flickr photo display, a Twitter widget, social media buttons to integrate all of your other online doings with your home site on the web, Google Maps, and more. Website tracking so you know how many times your site is viewed, and a built-in search engine optimizer. There's permission access handling and cloud architecture for speed and site stability. These sites do not go down. You don't have to worry about that. Use Squarespace for all of your website needs. Build it, host it, and update it anytime. For a free trial, go to squarespace.com. Sign up for your free account. You don't need a credit card. Just try it out and start building your site. Really, you'll be up and running in minutes. You'll be so stunned at how easy it is to use if you haven't tried it yet. Then if you decide to purchase, use the offer code TWiL5 and you'll get 10% off your first purchase with your new account, whatever that first purchase may be. So if you're buying a month of service, you're going to get 10% off of that. If you're buying a year, you're going to get 10% off that. And don't forget about their free domain registration with annual plan subscriptions. That's squarespace.com, and then use the offer code TWiL5. We thank Squarespace so much for their support of This Week in Law. Evan, you have a link in our notes here we've been talking about Facebook privacy most of the time. It's not very private when the government has a backdoor into your data. Do you want to tell us what's going on there?
Well, this is the latest manifestation of something we've been hearing from the federal government in a number of different ways, and that is having more access to the communications that internet users are engaging in. And the FBI seems to be really interested in this, particularly right now. The director was testifying in front of Congress this past week and actually talked about the FBI's interest in amending CALEA, which is the statute. It stands for the Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act. It was signed way back in the Clinton administration that requires telecommunications companies to make it easy for law enforcement to come in and eavesdrop on conversations. There's this interest in having CALEA amended to make it easier for internet communications to be monitored by the feds, pursuant to a court order and all that stuff. So, it's just one of those things where this is a very sensitive issue because of the inherent privacy interest, and so we've got to really watch these things very closely to make sure that that there aren't developments here going on that don't comport with the traditional notions of due process that we've all come to that we've grown accustomed to. So it's just it's one of those things that privacy advocates and people who care at all about privacy and civil liberties need to be watching these things, and there is some activity on this front right now, at least strong talk from the director of the FBI.
Cash, do you think that this is going to go anywhere? I mean, people, as we have been talking about, are so sensitive about these issues.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big push from the government. I think there's this feeling that there's so much crime happening now on the internet, cyber threats, and that technology companies can see all these things that are going on in a way that law enforcement can't get access to in the way that they've been used to getting access to with cellular communications. So I'm just seeing a big push here in many different spheres by the government to be able to get easier access to cyber information, whether it's through backdoors to certain kind of internet communications or CISPA, the Cyber Information Sharing Act, that would make it easier for companies to hand information over to some government entity. They're not sure yet, maybe the Department of Homeland Security, to make it just make crime solving easier and to better protect the country. There's such a I'm not sure what's going to happen. I mean, these things were pushed through in earlier times, but I get the sense now that the kind of internet is more aware, and they seem to really react to these things. And whether that internet activism will be as effective as it was with the Stop Online Privacy Act, where there was kind of corporate backing, is kind of unclear to me.
Yeah, Evan, you pointed us toward an article on Mashable that was from their conference. I guess it was called Mashable Connect, maybe? Jotted it down. But anyway, yeah. Lawrence Lessig spoke there and had a theory on, well, this seems to be his main bang the drum thesis these days, is that we've got to get money out of politics if we want to avoid bad legislation. Do you want to expand on his comments at the conference?
Well, that's certainly a noble approach. And, we definitely need to be watchful of our representatives to ensure that they are not, that they do not succumb to the corrupting influence of money and campaign donations. And we're living in a time now where corporate interests have a very clear path to affecting political decisions with the super PACs and, the changing ways that campaign finance has been done in the last few, in the very recent history here. So Lawrence Lessig, he takes a very intelligent approach to this, but I would caution anyone who will listen to make sure that we don't take the position of, or we take the idea that money can corrupt to an irrational extreme and say that money always does corrupt. Because there clearly are important interests that are furthered by political donations and contributions. That's one of the ways that capitalism works in a good, pure sense. We don't want money to be a corrupting influence like what we see sometimes happening with the RIAA, the big content industries, throwing so much money at Congress that silly legislation like SOPA and PIPA gets written I don't know if that's corruption or not, but there certainly is the influence there of that lobby. We should just look at it in a granular sense, on a case-by-case basis, and not always assume that if there's money behind something that it is for a corrupt end. That's how I think we should think about this issue.
Getting back to the government and accessing information in people's accounts, Facebook is not the only person or entity that's been updating its policies lately. Twitter just did yesterday and sent out an email to users letting them know that they had made changes, provided more details about the information they collect, and clarified the limited circumstances in which user information may be shared with others. Looking at that in more detail, I'm trying to see if they, say anything specific. We engage service providers to perform functions and provide services to us. We may preserve or disclose information if we believe that it is reasonably necessary to comply with a law, regulation, or legal request. So they throw in their reasonable belief that it is necessary to comply with a request for information, which is an interesting and consistent with the way that Twitter has approached this historically perspective. Let's see if they go any further. They say they're going to address fraud, security, or technical issues and may have to access information for those reasons. So what do you think about this, Cash? Do you like the fact that Twitter goes ahead and advises users that Twitter has to be on board with the request in order for it to deem it proper to comply?
I think Twitter's been a very admirable company in terms of being very upfront about how it responds to law enforcement requests. There have been some notable cases recently in which it is fighting to disclose to users when law enforcement comes and wants information about them. This happened with the WikiLeaks case. Currently, they're fighting back against a request from law enforcement for public tweets made by a participant in Occupy Wall Street. They say that the government needs a warrant to get those tweets. So, I do like that the company is making it very clear to users what the requirements are. Increasingly, I think it's hard for these companies. We store so much personal information there. They really are our digital homes. But they get to make the decision about when to hand over information and when not to. I interviewed Facebook's chief of security, Joe Sullivan, and they're trying to balance the looking out for their users and making sure that their users trust them to protect their information, and then when they need to legally hand stuff over to police when they come. I think Twitter's been better than some of the other companies about telling users when there has been a request for their information.
But the problem, I guess, with a backdoor is it sort of renders that kind of thing irrelevant. Isn't that right, Lisa?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
If there's backdoor access to the data on something like Twitter or Facebook, as the FBI director and others are lobbying for, then, Twitter saying we're going to have a reasonable review of every request for information kind of goes out the window, doesn't it?
It does. So there's two different lines of inquiry here. I mean, one is the FBI, asking for these companies to basically change the way they're programmed. And when you were first talking about that, I was reminded, I had a friend who was a government contractor and he did IT stuff. This was about 10 years ago. He contracted with the FBI and he said, oh yeah, their email doesn't work. They're so behind in their own technology that they can't have email, and I don't see any of these companies voluntarily going along with the FBI's idea of how they should program their products. I think that's kind of a bad idea. Maybe that is just the privacy correct thing to say, but I don't like that. Twitter, I think they're very progressive in the sense of, weren't they the ones that actually even pointed some of the users who were the subjects of the WikiLeaks subpoenas to motions to quash, or kind of directed them to some self-help about how to make a motion to quash a subpoena? Disclosure is good, I suppose, if it leads to some sort of action that someone can take. It sounded like you were picking up, Denise, on this injection of Twitter's reasonable belief that it's necessary. So I don't know if that's a more aggressive approach in terms of safeguarding user information at its own discretion, or you think that's sort of a putting it off onto a legal standard?
I think it's fairly unique. I think that other sites would just say, hey, if we're confronted with a government request, we may have to turn over your information and leave it at that, and not interject that we're going to review those requests and decide whether or not it's reasonable to comply. I mean, that's kind of putting themselves on the line.
Aren't they really the same thing? I mean, when I hear that change that Twitter made, it sounds broad enough that you could drive a truck through it. In our reasonable discretion, we'll do whatever we think is right. Well, you know what? I bet in 99.9% of the cases, there I am making up more statistics on the spot. Twitter's going to say, we've got this warrant, or we have this subpoena, we have this 2703D order. You know what? It's reasonable that we comply with this. Okay, here's the information. That's what's going to happen. This is just a way. And again, I gotta make sure I'm contextualizing this. I respect Twitter's approach to all this stuff, and I respect its legal counsel personally, and all that stuff. But there's nothing really earth breaking or ground shattering. Is that right? It doesn't sound quite right. You know what I mean? That's just legal speak.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's nice when you think about Twitter's business, what the business model really is, and what makes it so unique as a product is its ephemerality, and it's very casual. It's here today, gone tomorrow. There's always a stream. There's always something new, and it's not just to prove a point. I mean, I think the fact that they filed this motion to quash in the Occupy Wall Street case is kind of a sensible thing to do, because they do want to stay as being one of these world-changing products that really has the ability to be a factor in how news is disseminated, and sometimes how the political process works. So I think that these two actions are congruent: the change in how it announces its terms of service, and the actual action it has taken in this Occupy Wall Street case.
Right. And Evan, you were saying, it's legal language big enough to drive a truck through, but it's carefully chosen legal language that I think is a little different than the way other companies put themselves out there. They're definitely taking a stand even with that broad language. They don't have to say anything about reviewing it. And maybe, as you've said in the past, this is a PR calculated move as opposed to something that really is standing up for users, but I think Twitter, has at least in some public and high profile instances done just that.
Sure. And we all know that the most important thing you learn in law school is that when you are looking at a sentence and you're asked to review something, as legal counsel, your duty, your standard of care is to just insert the word reasonable in it somewhere, and then you've done your job as a lawyer. So there you go.
Hey,
don't give away the secret that's what law school is all about. That's what $100,000 in 3 years will get you. Just put the word reasonable in there.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Also, you can put commercially reasonable in. That's even better.
Ooh, that's fancy. That's if you're dealing with business people.
Well, when you're dealing with lawyers, this is picking up on something you said a minute ago, Lisa, about how companies aren't going to tailor their services to meet the needs of the FBI. You might not be so certain about that if you believe Ron Amadeo, writing for Android Police, who puts forth a pretty good case that the Samsung Galaxy S3 was designed from bottom up simply not to violate any Apple trade dress. And he goes through in a spec-by-spec way with illustrations, cribbing some language from trade dress claims brought in April of 11 against Samsung that said that, Apple's trade dress is as follows. We have a rectangular product shape with all four corners uniformly rounded, and going down the list, et cetera. What kind of perimeter, what kind of black border, et cetera. And he shows how the Galaxy X3 or S3 has the opposite of all of those things. All four corners are not symmetrically rounded. The borders are sufficiently different. The colors, there's no black. There's only white and blue. And concludes with the fact that, there's no getting around. This phone was designed by the lawyers, or more specifically, maybe Apple's lawyers are so badass that they can dictate how other companies' phones are designed. What do you think of this, Evan?
I think this is above all a really creative blog post, that he did parsing this like that. That's what I see the best about it. And yeah, it's easy to make fun of the lawyers. Fine, haha, we'll laugh along. We all know that it's the real intellectual property issues that are driving this discussion. The lawyers don't know enough to design a phone. Let's all get over ourselves. So, but yeah, I like it. It was some good writing.
Yes. Cash, any thoughts on this?
I'm going to leave the copyright and IP issues to you all.
All right. Lisa?
I love this article. This was my favorite story this week. As a former visual design student, it was a brilliant sort of picking apart of the elements that Apple had pointed to as making its phone distinctive. And they seem obvious. But when you do look at the Samsung Galaxy 3, you look at it and you're like, God, it's kind of ugly. Like, why does it look like that? And then they go through like the rounded corners. They're different. The top and bottom corners are different. It's very awkward looking. I mean, it might be overkill, but I mean, he is making a point. I mean, it seems as if Apple could just file a patent or trademark just on making beautiful products, and then everyone else has to make hideous products just not to step on their trade dress. But I mean, that was an amazing article. I encourage everyone to check it out.
Yeah, it definitely was good and humorous, and maybe right is the scary thing. I mean, he really does set forth a pretty good case that this phone was designed with these kinds of considerations in mind. So I don't know. We would only know if we talked to Samsung's designers. He also throws in that Samsung is a huge supplier of components for Apple, and so wants to try and remain on its good side as much as possible. Let's talk about frictionless sharing, shall we? Because that gets us into some entertainment-related stuff as well. Back to Facebook and how it is sharing your information and your activities. So Cash, why don't you first explain to us what frictionless sharing is and how companies like Netflix and Hulu are involved?
Sure. So frictionless sharing is basically something you can enable where things are automatically shared. So instead of reading this great kind of Android Samsung piece and then choosing to post it to Facebook, you could just automatically have Facebook pick up on the fact that you were there and tell all of your friends that you read that article. Hulu and Netflix, Washington Post famously has enabled this. There are a few video sites that also want to do this, and it's a little legally unclear as to how the Video Privacy Protection Act plays into this. So Hulu immediately jumped on frictionless sharing so that every time I watched a Hulu video, it would show up on my Facebook timeline that I had watched and in the newsfeed that I had watched this video. But Netflix didn't do that because they were afraid that it would violate the Video Privacy Protection Act. And they basically went to Congress and they're lobbying to change the act so that Netflix can start doing frictionless sharing. And so it's kind of like a gray area as to why Hulu thinks it's okay and Netflix lawyers don't think it's okay. there are a few sites. They're called Vidi, I think. They're these kind of like they call them the Instagram for video, where you can make your own video and then share it with your friends. And they've all turned on frictionless sharing, and it's allowed them to add users really, really quickly, because it'll say, Kashmir watched this, bum fight. And if you want to see the video she watched, you have to add the app. And so they've just really had this like escalation in users added. But I think some people wonder why anyone would turn on frictionless sharing, because do you really want things to be automatically added with kind of no control and no kind of, whoops, that was kind of an embarrassing video I watched. I'm not sure if I necessarily want my friends to know I looked at it.
Yeah, what kind of fight were you watching?
They're apparently on Vidi, and I forget what the other one is called. A lot of kind of violent fights. There was this famous after Fight Club. There was like the Bum Fight Club, where people would pay bums to fight each other, and there were a lot of bum fights on. You can go to YouTube if you would like to check it out, or I can send you my list of favorite ones.
Yeah. Maybe you can just be sure to enable frictionless sharing for that genre. That would be really nice. That's where we need to go with this.
Well, that's actually not a bad idea, because there certainly are classes of things that you might want to share as, oh, this was fine family entertainment, and I want to recommend, this latest movie that I've seen, give it a big thumbs up, a la Roger Ebert. But, your bum fight viewing, you might want to keep private. So yeah, I could see where frictionless sharing is good in concept, but maybe for some who just want to have a few less clicks in their lives and do like to share things. But, in immediate or preliminary execution anyway, it's not so useful because, of course, you're not going to want to share everything, unless you're just a really, really boring person. What do you think, Lisa?
I am not a huge fan of this, although I can see why people who love social networking and love everyone in their network to know what they're consuming all the time would find it appealing. I thought that article was interesting because it introduced this concept of shoulder surfing, which I had never heard, and I had to look it up. So traditionally, shoulder surfing seems to mean that it's a method of surveillance where you're kind of picking up people's ATM passwords or other data by looking over their shoulder. So I'm not really sure how that fits into the idea of this frictionless sharing. But as a user, personally, I don't prefer to see the consumption preferences of my friends unless they've specifically opted in, like say they find a song that they particularly like or an article that they thought was really good. And I think we already have tools to do that. One issue is that sometimes you turn these things on and it's hard to undo it. So I've never wanted to click through on any of those shares because I think it then makes me have to share everything. And, years could go by and I might have forgotten about it. But, it's the market. And if that's what people like and if that's what people want, certainly they should be given the option to do that. I think it's part of the overwhelming trend of desensitization to, where we end and where the internet and the mesh kind of begins.
Yeah, it's certainly just one more thing for Facebook and others, as they follow suit to monitor and track and compile about us. The stock, by the way, got up to over 42 at one point. It's back down to 38.7 at the moment. Let's check in with our second sponsor for the show, which is also about sharing in a totally private and secure way, and that is Sharefile from Citrix. As we all know, in business today, it's important that everything runs efficiently. That includes large or confidential documents and presentations getting to clients immediately and securely. You have to be able to collaborate on those files with colleagues and business partners easily and securely, and work effectively away from the office by accessing files from any computer or mobile device at any time. So Sharefile is exactly the solution that you need for all of these problems. It's a secure file sharing solution that is built specifically for business, as opposed to a lot of other consumer-oriented alternatives out there that people may be using as a stopgap because it's such a necessary function. We all need to have a way to get these files around, but until Sharefile, we really haven't had a secure and business-oriented way to do it. Sharefile helps your business run smoothly by sending files of almost any size without the frustration of bounce backs. You can collaborate on files securely and completely under your control. It's the perfect solution to doing business in today's digital world. I really like its Outlook plugin that makes that just a seamless experience when you're writing an email and you have a big file. Instead of attaching it and waiting for it not to get through, you just drop it right into the Sharefile universe, and it goes to the site that you're able to customize so that it matches your own web presence. And your clients and customers go there and they know that they're dealing with you securely. In the same way as if you had set up, spent a bunch of money and set up your own secure infrastructure for this. You don't have to do that because Sharefile does it for you. It's really a wonderful service. I want you not to believe me, though. We have a great offer for you. You need to try it for yourself. So go ahead and try it. You get 30 days free plus double storage. So really, really, test out those great big files that you need to share. Whether it's enormous documents or photos, images, video, it can handle it all. In order to get that special offer, go to sharefile.com and click on the radio microphone. Enter the promo code TWiL, TWiL, and that way you'll get 30 days free plus double storage. Remember, visit sharefile.com and type in TWiL. Thank you so much, Sharefile, for your support of This Week in Law. All right, folks. Facebook, we've been on quite a bit during this show. And Cash just let me know right before the show started that coincidentally timed with today's IPO, there's also a $15 billion user tracking lawsuit pending in California, a would-be class action. This has been around for a while, you were saying, Cash?
There were a series of suits filed based on this issue of Facebook following users about a year ago. So now they've been consolidated into one big, giant class action lawsuit that's been filed in California.
Right. So that Facebook tracks people by their use of likes on other sites. And folks apparently feel that this damages them. Evan, how exactly do you feel? I mean, what are the plaintiffs really after here? Again, it's one of those public information is public conundrums, isn't it?
Well, I guess so. I mean, I haven't studied it. This is news, and I haven't read the complaint. I read about it, when it was first filed last year. But I mean, it's a class action. So right there, it's a red flag that this is a lawsuit that's intended to benefit mostly the plaintiff's lawyers. So that's, I think, the only lens that you can really look through all this. The Wiretap Act, what they're talking about is the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, the intercepting electronic communications while they're in transit without the authority, without the consent of the one making those communications. And that provides for statutory damages that really add up quickly, big numbers for harm that really isn't all that bad. Before the show and some of our pre-show banter, we were comparing it was all very tongue-in-cheek, but there is a serious aspect of it too. The harm that befalls a person in this type of alleged, and I'm saying that in the most diminutive way possible, privacy violation is not of the same nature, the same kind as a true personal injury where somebody loses a limb or suffers, extreme physical pain or something like that. So if you've listened to me on the show talk enough, you know that I certainly have a prejudice against class actions like this. There's kind of like a rebuttable presumption that I bring to every inquiry about these big class action lawsuits over privacy, because I don't think they serve the public interest. I'm starting to sound like a broken record to my own self. They don't benefit really anyone in the end too dramatically, other than the plaintiffs' lawyers who are just using them to be opportunistic. So I'll give it a fair shot. I'll look at it, study it a little bit more, but something like this just really smacks of something unsubstantive to me.
Seems like a real uphill battle to me to get anywhere with this kind of lawsuit, unless Facebook were doing something that it hadn't disclosed, or, something sneaky or nefarious, which really, people opt into this kind of thing. Don't you think, Lisa?
Yeah, I do think that. I mean, I think the trouble with a lot of consumer-type litigation against Facebook on behalf of a large group of users is that a lot of the remedies in California provide only for restitution. Unfair claims or unfair business practices cases really only get you back what you paid to the company. And here the users didn't pay anything to the company. I was just browsing around trying to understand the legal theory for this case. And I mean, it seems like one of these citizen prosecutor cases where technically the law that's violated is the U.S. Wiretap Act. And it seems like kind of a stretch because what I'm seeing from the coverage so far is that it wants to, the plaintiffs in this case want to say that by embedding these like buttons all over the internet, Facebook collected and tracked user behavior in a way that they didn't disclose. But I kind of thought that's what the like button was for. So, I mean, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the theory might be that, okay, we understand what a like button is when it's on the Facebook site, but when it's somewhere else, I don't know, perhaps they're alleging that like is a sufficiently generic enough concept that even when it is dressed up exactly the way you would see it on Facebook, people weren't making that association. I don't know. We'll have to see.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to look at the complaint and the orders to see what the theory of the case is. In tech coverage, some of the articles do let you download the complaint, so I'm kind of hunting around trying to find something like that. But it brings me back to something I was going to say about the IPO. Anyone want to take a bet on when the first class action securities litigation case is going to be filed against this now public company? Because you can bet there's going to be any number of theories now that Facebook is openly traded on the market.
I don't know. It doesn't seem like maybe it has, and I just haven't been following it. But it doesn't seem like, for example, Google has had to labor under a whole bunch of those. Evan, are you any more enlightened than I am?
Well, I think you both make pretty good points on this. It seems like Facebook is more of a lightning rod for controversy than what Google has been. Yes, I know Google sometimes does things that irritate people with privacy, like with the Buzz settlement in particular and all that stuff. But man, Facebook is always causing controversy, whereas Google seems to be a little bit more on an even keel with a lot of this stuff. So I suppose that I bet you that it'll be one way or the other. Either there will be some shareholder litigation or there won't.
Yeah. Well, Google's in a different situation, right? It's got so many arms of its octopus. It has search, it has video, it has, things that are popularly used by hundreds of millions of users, other than simply its social networking, which is kind of late to the game. So, when I read articles about how Google and Facebook are struggling to be able to monetize mobile, or they've really got to find other ways to monetize their social platforms, I see that as so comparing apples and oranges, because Google has all the monetization it seems to really need with its search ads, right? And with AdSense and everything else. It's figured out monetization. And the rest of its arms just sort of bring everybody into the Google fold. So, if Google were to come out and say, if you want everyone on Google Plus to be able to see, all your circle people on Google Plus to be able to see what you've posted there, you're going to have to pay extra for that. I can't see that they would ever even consider that kind of an approach for a second. Whereas apparently this is something that's being bandied around at Facebook. Just a different environment. They don't. I think the reason is they don't have that huge monetization engine to fall back on.
So if I'm hearing you right, are you suggesting that it would actually be more likely that Facebook would face this kind of litigation? Because I heard you say earlier that, well,
I think you're right.
Google.
You said it. I think that it's more of a lightning rod and that it will take actions. It has shown itself able to take actions that are controversial among its user base. So, yeah, maybe so. Let's talk about. Go ahead. Last thought.
I was just going to say one thing I think is interesting in these suits against Facebook and then also Google is this like kind of awkward use of old privacy laws that they try to apply to kind of current technologies. So, the Wiretap Act is meant for somebody tapping your phone, and they're trying to use it in this case to say that Facebook violated the Wiretap Act by intercepting your communication with another website about where you were. And at the same time, you have this huge, the YSpy Street View litigation against Google. And again, they're using the same Wiretap Act to say that Google shouldn't have intercepted what was being sent out on public Wi-Fi networks. So it's just this really interesting, these are two such different cases, and they're both trying to use the Wiretap Act as the law that's been violated. So I just think this points to.
And the Wiretap Act really does lend itself well to being the round hole in which square pegs are put, because that's what prosecuting attorneys rely on in going after people who are filming the cops. When they can capture that audio stream, because that's interception of an oral communication. So, it underscores the point you're making, Kashmir, that these antiquated privacy laws, when you take modern day factual contexts and lay the template of these old privacy laws down on top of them, you can get some pretty wacky arguments being made. That's for sure.
Okay, I found the case. If anyone's interested, it's called Davis versus Facebook, and it was actually filed back in September. I suppose somebody wanted to report on it because today's the IPO, but they've been doing basic case management tasks from then until now. Nothing really has happened in the case this week, but I guess it is an interesting story.
You're not accusing Mashable of just cobbling together a story to coincide with the IPO. I hope not.
I don't want to speculate. I'm always interested in this, but I don't know if people realize. Hundreds, well, at least dozens, many lawsuits are filed against Facebook all the time, and they don't always get press. And they don't always get covered, but it happens all the time. And Facebook it's often filing lawsuits against others, as you've discussed in many episodes of this show.
Right. All right. Well, we were talking about antiquated laws. Lots of people think the FAA's restrictions on what you can and cannot do with your technology on airplanes are a bit antiquated. And even the FAA is reviewing those restrictions to see if they're going to lighten them up, although that will no doubt be a time-consuming process. In the meantime, we had some controversy this month between the guy who founded a company called Viber. His name is Talman Marco, and he was on a Delta flight using his own Viber application, which is a VoIP and free texting app. And he was doing a VoIP call on the GoGo in-flight Wi-Fi on his Delta flight. And the flight attendants came up to him and told him, no, you can't make VoIP calls. He asked them politely and calmly why. And they said they at first, made the mistake of saying it was banned by the FAA. They turned out to be wrong about that. What in fact was the case is that it violates the GoGo terms of service, and that this turns out to have been a decision made by the airlines themselves, because they just don't want people, who knows what their reasoning is. My speculation is they either don't want people loudly talking on the phone and they already can't use their cell phones, or also, it could be a bandwidth issue related to go-go in flight. But anyway, the guy had a discussion with two separate flight attendants about this, and they began to think that he was somehow a problem, and they called the police and had him escorted off the flight where he was questioned by the police, who let him go. So I guess the moral of this story is that, no matter how or why, don't be using VoIP on a plane, because it can be, even if you're the founder of a VoIP company, it can be problematic for you. But then hard on the heels of this, we learned that Virgin has announced that for its London to New York flights on its Airbuses, it's going to be okay to use cell phones to make calls. They're going to limit, again, this is a bandwidth issue, and I've read either 6 or 10 people at a time on the whole big Airbus plane can be on their phones at any one time, and good luck trying to decide who gets to go next to use their phone. I'm sure they must have some system in place for that. But sort of a related story. What do you think, Evan, about the whole conundrum of what apps and services you can use while in flight?
The Viber thing, that is nothing but a PR thing, stunt by that guy. For Viber.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, oh, how wonderful. Oh, I'm getting picked on by these flight attendants. Come on. The job of the flight attendant is to not the job of the flight attendant is not to know the FAA regulations pertaining to telecommunications and communications front to back. The job of the flight attendant is to ensure the safe and orderly boarding and deplaning, and to bring blankets and soda and all those noble things that flight attendants do. So, it's very likely that an executive of Nestle Purina, if he brought a can of Alpo on board and was eating his own dog food, that he would have gotten called out by the flight attendants as well too. So I don't see anything really into that. That's just an apparition, with the strangeness of the unsettled nature of what that is right there. So, but as far as the larger picture goes, this just has to be a part of technological evolution, as the science becomes more precise and the means of communication become more efficient and less likely to interfere with the most important types of ground-to-air communications and air-to-ground communications. Then there's no reason why that shouldn't be opened up to consumers. And I trust that the FAA and all the other appropriate regulators, FCC, will follow the science and make the right decisions, as our government always does, right?
Yeah. In the meantime, even if it was a PR stunt, and I think that that's possible, it does point out an issue that they're going to have until the FAA and the airlines figure out how to let people use the technology they're used to using. You're going to have people trying to make Skype and other VoIP calls on planes because they have internet access, and that's what they're used to doing. I mean, this isn't going to be the last time we hear about problems with that until they decide that it's okay and have a means to do it. Don't you think, Lisa?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I like this story because in my life, I find it very rare people do want to talk on the phone when they can text or send an email. So I'm kind of wondering how big of a problem is this? Because we have all these texting drivers in California that they're causing a big problem. Why don't they just pick up the phone and use VoIP and make their calls that way? And people on the planes can type out on their keyboards. I guess I have some sympathy for the passengers on the plane, because if you think about it, if everyone did it, it might be kind of a miserable flight. And I think Virgin's flight is going to be technically limited only to 10 passengers at a time anyway. So, I mean, that almost seems like of negligible use if it's really that important. I don't know how. Oh, sorry.
Beatmaster is telling me that it's unlimited in first class over in IRC. So
that's a good way to sell first class seats.
Yeah, exactly.
Occupy first class.
I just hope that if this becomes more popular, that as trains have quiet cars, I hope planes have quiet wings, because that is where I would be sitting.
Right. Well, it's already an issue not just with VoIP and other phone communications. People watch movies, listen to audiobooks, there's so much you could play video games, whatever. There's all kinds of loud devices that people have to use on planes. And I know this because I fly with a youngster who likes to listen to loud things on planes and didn't like to wear headphones. That for a long time I would have conflicts with flight attendants. He's got to put his headphones on, but he hates headphones. Does he really? Yeah, he really does. So I think that they pretty much require you to put that in. Oh, Beatmaster was joking with me. I thought that was really something you read, Beatmaster, because it makes perfect sense that they would, maybe make it unlimited for first class, but maybe the band.
Titanic.
Yeah, it is a good idea. Funny. All right. Well, I thought this was really interesting. Lisa, you tweeted about a BitTorrent case, where the judge made, I think, probably a reasonable decision. Oh, I'm using that freighted word again. How about a correct decision? That an IP address is not a person. Can you tell us more about that?
Oh, thank God. Hallelujah. It's about time. So much of the litigation targeting people for file sharing is all based on this erroneous assumption that an IP address equates to a particular user or a person. And back a few years ago, when I was on the defense panel for John Doe's in these RIAA music file sharing cases, that Ray Beckerman, who I know has been on the show before, primarily led, we would have endless issues over expert discovery and expert witnesses trying to, explain to the court in an understandable way how the many ways in which IP addresses can be unreliable in pointing to a particular person. So the way these cases work would be generally that the copyright holder, in those cases, the music companies, would go into court ex parte, which means without notice and without a public hearing or anything, and just get a very broad-based discovery order that they suspected file sharing, and then they would get identifying information from the internet service providers and try to match up a theory that these IP addresses equaled an infringer. And so finally, in this case, the judge said, you know what, enough of this. This isn't enough to go on. And it's not a reasonable, to use that word again, it's not a reasonable leap of logic to make that an IP address identifies a particular person, and particularly to an extent that it would entitle you to all kinds of presumptions that you can get discovery and force people to comply with very broad subpoenas. So that was actually a very important decision, and I think a very good one.
All right. Well, thanks for the update on that. Let's update a couple of other things we've been following. First of all, the Google versus Oracle case, just real briefly, it's still grinding on. I think the patent phase of the case went to the jury this week. The copyright phase went and had some strange things that happened when the jury decided there was infringement. They didn't actually answer the verdict question that they had on fair use. So Google has moved for a mistrial based on that, and that motion's still pending. We don't know if it will go anywhere. The fact that an infringement was found, though, isn't going to mean anything unless Judge Alsup ultimately rules that APIs are actually capable of copyright infringement, which is sort of the big issue still hanging over the case, which, we'll know lots more about how this case is going to go when he finally rules on that. What else? Jurors are dropping like flies, getting ill. They're facing some challenge to actually having a complete jury to wrap up the case. That happens when you have cases go on this long. Evan, any other thoughts or comments just to update folks on the ongoing litigation?
There was that agreement that they came up with. I don't really understand the contours of it, but isn't Oracle kind of betting the farm, either all or nothing, in its damages with this claim, with this agreement that it's made with Google? I don't know the nuances. I just read that article here, but there's I guess the fundamental point is that Google and Oracle are actually talking a little bit about resolution, at least defining the contours of what the resolution might look like in this. So that's another kind of aspect of this as well.
Yeah, two other interesting little tidbits. Number one, Oracle is opting for copyright damages based on the value of the infringement as opposed to statutory damages, which the judge has expressed huge skepticism that they would ever be able to get. Interesting choice there to take that tack in.
I don't know why the judge
case
is giving them a hard time about that. I mean, why not? Because you can recover actual damages in as much as either the infringer's profits or your actual losses are tied to the infringement. So, maybe somebody who has better insight into this can explain why Judge Alsop was giving Oracle such a hard time. That seems like a perfectly valid theory to me. Now, granted, Oracle's not entitled to all of the revenue from Android. But, certainly a portion of it that is likely in excess of $150,000, which would be the maximum amount of statutory damages that they could get, which would make it sensible for Oracle to want to get that. So, but in any event,
right. My assumption on that was that it was going to be such a mind-bogglingly huge number that the judge was admiring their gusto, maybe, perhaps, their brazenness, or in awe of it anyway. The other interesting thing was that the judge himself came out and said that he'd done a bit of Java programming to familiarize himself with the issues in the case, which that might be a first.
That's awesome.
Java programming federal judge. Other thing to follow up on, we were talking about Google self-driving cars last week, and we got an email from listener Steve Wolf, who is blind and has been since 1990. He's 41 and loves the idea of being able to go into a car and have it take him where he needs to go. But he's wondering about insurance issues, which is something we hadn't thought about. Before the show, we were talking about when two self-driving cars get into an accident, how do you allocate fault? Another interesting issue. But also, this is a real issue now in Nevada where these cars are legal. It would be an interesting conversation with your insurance company to go, by the way, I bought a new car and it drives itself. So write my policy. I'm sure they will insure them, but I'm betting they're slightly more pricey than other types of cars. Any thoughts on that, Evan?
You could save, or 15 minutes could save you, what is it? How does the slogan go? 15 minutes could save you 15% by switching to another insurance company. Yeah, that would be an analysis that probably the insurance companies are not actually making yet, but preparing, thinking about it theoretically. And so, to go around evaluating, how would you actually quantify that risk? And it would be interesting. You would think about the conditions under which it would be driven. You would want to have whatever data there is available to show the likelihood of actually having an accident. So it would be interesting to have the conversation with the insurance company in the face of data which could suggest that it's actually safer to drive.
Who knows? Maybe it'll be cheaper to insure those cars.
Yes, because there's less likely to be human error, of course, in that situation. So I would be really interested in seeing what the science is as to how well, what the likelihood of an accident is, say, over 500-mile stretch because of the absence of factors like fatigue or distractedness or the sun being in your eyes, all things that would be not a risk to an automatically directed vehicle, but would be to a human-directed vehicle.
Well, I'm going to have to ask some of my friends in the insurance industry, including Carl Sussman, who's been on the show a couple times, to see what they think about that. Let's get to our tip of the week, which comes to us courtesy of Kashmir and Evan. And the tip that I derive from all this is, although the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act is broad and opened to lots of creative interpretations, you shouldn't rely on it to protect you when you've been upskirting the women in your law firm. Evan, why shouldn't you?
Oh, geez, I'm so embarrassed. This would be the episode that there are three women on the show and me. So
that's right.
This was a crazy case. I came across it because of some actual stuff that's going on later. The case has actually been going on for a while. It was filed in late 2011, but this guy, he's a lawyer. And he, in mid-June, last year instituted a new dress code in his office. Women have to wear skirts, and then he changed the desks to take away the modesty panels. And so there's evidence that he had installed this iPhone app called Camouflage and had recorded surreptitiously some upskirt shots of his female employees. So Cash wrote a great article kind of doing an expose on that app, the Camouflage app. I picked it up and wrote about the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act claim, which he made as a counterclaim against these employees who had sued him for outrage. Don't you love that as a cause of action? Evidently, Missouri affords that as a cause of action. But he'd filed a counterclaim for the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act saying, hey, you got on my iPhone and my iPad and my computer and deleted my stuff. And it was the court tossed that out under 12b-6, which said he failed to state a claim upon which relief can be granted because in his Computer Fraud and Abuse Act claim, he didn't identify which data they had allegedly deleted. So, you sit here and scratch our heads. It's like, oh my gosh, I wonder what data they would have wanted to delete, these women who found that they were allegedly the victims of
it's kind of a poor statement on the CFAA that if he had just stated his damages a little more specifically, it actually might have survived.
Yeah, I mean, what's wrong with just going ahead and say, hey, you deleted all these pics I had of you taking up your skirt. That's going to be a very sympathetic counterclaim plaintiff, don't you think?
Yes, absolutely. Kashmir, any thoughts on this since you wrote about it as well?
Yeah, I just thought this was interesting from the kind of privacy by design perspective. There are all these ways that you can build privacy into products. And like with your computer, this light comes on when my camera's on so that I know I'm being filmed. And with most phones, when you take a photo, it makes that noise. And for many phones, I think you can't actually turn off that noise. And that's a privacy feature so that somebody knows you're taking a picture. But with this privacy app, it circumvents that so that it doesn't make the noise. And there's no kind of camera feature that comes up on the phone. So it's designed so you can, apparently take photos under someone's desk, or you can use it on the subway. It's just another way to kind of invade people's privacy without them knowing.
Yeah, Travel Rants in IRC was just confirming what I was thinking, is that on the iPhone, you can turn that off. So when you're photographing the hummingbird in your yard, you won't startle it. But yes, I could see that there would be a privacy ramification to that too. Our resource of the week is really cool. I found it in the process of, we've mentioned a couple times on the show that there was a legal hackathon at the Brooklyn Law Incubator and Policy Clinic, BLIP. And I judged their Hack the Act segment, and they had some really good submissions for that. And in looking at all the submissions, they were on something called Docracy, which I'd never seen before, but it's about a year old. It itself won a TechCrunch hackathon contest for new apps or services. And it is a open legal documents platform, kind of like Wikipedia for legal documents. You can upload legal documents. You can tweak the ones that are there to improve them. So it's like this collaborative database of things that you might use all the time, like leases and NDAs and just common, handy legal documents. Of course, they're very careful to say that nothing on the site is legal advice, and they are not lawyers, and you really need to talk to a lawyer in your state about your specific problem. But here you go. If you're willing to ignore all that good advice, you have some pretty good documents and forms you can use at docracy.com. Lisa, have you taken a look at this? Have you ever used something like this?
Docracy.com?
Yeah.
I haven't taken a look at that. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, you should. It's pretty cool. Evan, how about you?
Yeah, I looked at it. My first impulse as a practicing attorney was thinking, oh, my God, I'm going to get driven out of business. Now people can go find their contracts online. So I was scared to death.
Yeah, but you're a litigator. You're fairly covered.
Yeah, so I was running for the hills, but then I turned around and came back and thought, the people who are going to get documents off of this probably wouldn't want to hire a lawyer anyway. So it's not, piracy does not equal a lost sale and all that stuff. So what I like most about the actual service was the ability to comment so like you can critique the it's like, oh, this agreement sucks because it, the definition of proprietary information is too broad. So I could see how a really kind of nerd lawyer could get sucked into a Saturday evening spent just leaving comments on all these documents. That's the way that I think I'm going to spend this weekend, unless my wife can drag me out of the house some other way.
Right. We've been talking a lot about privacy on the show today, and intern Franklin Graves for TWiL did some digging around on the site, learned that all documents are defaulted to private upon uploading. Public sharing is opt-in. The network is cloud-based, encrypted, and remains private. And if you want to, if you're a lawyer or someone who is signing legal documents, even if you're not a lawyer, you can keep everything on their private, and they have an e-sign function. So you can actually share the document with a specific audience and get it e-signed and do your transaction that way. So it's a pretty darn cool little resource, Docracy, to check out. All right, guys, it's been so fun chatting with you all. Let's check in on the Facebook stock just to see how it's doing as we're closing the show. Ooh, it's down to 38.01. So back down to its open price. When's the market going to close? It's 1:45 here. It's already closed, right? Another
Isn't
hour.
It 4:30?
Yeah, it's 4 o'clock. Yeah, it's not quite. I think it's got another couple of minutes. But this is actually what happened with Google when its stock went public way back when. On the first day, it closed at the same price it came in at. And Google stock has done very well since then.
Yes.
So I don't think we have to judge by the first day.
It certainly has. And folks were worried that it's already, so overvalued. So maybe the market's just reflecting that, and things will go forth as with other tech stocks. They tend to do pretty well when they're an established company like this. Lisa, it's been such a great time today chatting with you again. It's too few and far between that we get the chance to talk.
Yeah, it was really nice. The time just flew by. Is this where we can make our closing comments or whatever?
Yes, please do. What closing comments might you have?
All right, so I want to apologize to Mashable. I did take another look at that docket in San Jose, and I see what they're reporting. There was an amended complaint filed in a related case. So it's not as though they just resuscitated it from nothing. But
that's good.
I'm going to take a look at that because I think the theories are interesting. Just now I looked at Docracy, and I think that's a great idea. I think it's a really cool idea, and by its name, and I'm always in favor of making the legal process more democratic and accessible, and I think that's good. And my next sort of public type participation is going to be June 18th. I'm going to be at the Stanford Ecommerce Best Practices Conference up in Palo Alto. So if anyone is in the area and wants to connect, just find me on Twitter or G+ or Facebook or anywhere you like. And thanks so much. It's been really fun talking to all of you. I really enjoyed it. Cash, I read your stuff all the time, and it's been great being on the show.
You too, and you're going to enjoy that conference. I've been to that one before. It's a nice one. Let's see. Docracy is funded by First Round Capital, Vazira Seed Fund, Quotidian Ventures, and Rick Webb. So yeah, they'll be interesting to watch. And I'm sure, Evan, you're not the only lawyer who quakes in his boots when confronted with something like this.
Yeah, I'm scared.
Yeah, no, it makes good sense to put some of the more straightforward stuff into a crowdsourced, publicly edited kind of format. So that's a very cool thing they've done. Cash, it's always great to have you on the show. We really enjoyed chatting with you again today.
This is a great conversation. I'm glad you guys invited me to be part of it. And
yes.
if I was going to give a tip, I was just going to remark on the fact that Twitter announced yesterday that it is enabling do not track. So if you don't like this idea of surfing around the web and sending information back to Twitter about the websites you're visiting, which is what that Facebook lawsuit is about, you can turn on do not track now with Twitter, and it won't track you.
That's great. So do you have to go to your settings and tick something to do that?
There is a box for this. and I think it'll be in the privacy settings on the twitter.com page.
Great. Good to know. All right, take care. Keep up the wonderful work. We are slavish devotees of your blog, the not so private parts, as I'm sure lots of our viewers and listeners are. So we'll check in with you often over there.
Thank you.
Evan, great to chat with you again.
Yes, great to chat with you. And Denise, you're the parent of a young child as well.
I do know.
I'm sad to report that the Wiggles broke up. So
no,
I saw a tweet from John Borodkin, Ars Technica, not to be confused with Lisa Borodkin. You say, how hard it is to, be excited about the Facebook IPO with this news. So I hope that we'll be able to make something of the rest of the day.
Not to make light of someone's actual demise, but gosh, first MCA and now the Wiggles. What's the world coming to?
Anna Summer, she's going to be next. You
watch. That's true. That's true. All right, everyone. Well, it's been a really good time today. We, of course, record every Friday, and you can tune in with us live to enjoy all the fun right along with our panel at twit.tv every Friday at 11 o'clock Pacific time, 1800 UTC. But if you can't do that, you can find us on YouTube and iTunes and all the places. Of course, our own site is twit.tv/TWiL with our whole archive of shows there. Get in touch with me between the shows over on Google Plus and on Twitter. Also on Facebook, we have a page there, This Week in Law, facebook.com/This Week in Law, where we will post up the videos of the shows as they become available and also have discussions about the stories that we're thinking about talking about on the show, get lots of input from you and some ideas as to what you want us to cover. You can shoot me emails on that front as well. I'm Denise at twit.tv. So we'll see you next Friday, I hope, here on the TWiT Network for This Week in Law. Take care, everyone. Thank you.